Some track and field fans have been desperate for a change in viewership for a while now. With the notable rise of content creators ranging from news or coverage channels to full-blown documentaries, there still remains this craving for a major boom again that will represent the Bolt era many still cherish and refer to this very day. When I first heard about a sprinting documentary coming out on Netflix, I didn't really know what to think of it, to be honest, but many seemed to be excited and plenty of pros were hyping it up as the next big thing for the sport. This series was created by the same studio as the ones behind Drive to Survive, a docuseries that served as a nice little catalyst for new fans to appreciate the sport through a more intense and intriguing lens. They also worked on other sports like golf with Full Swing and Tour de France Unchained on the cycling side, so I felt like I had to give Sprint a legitimate shot and to see if they could nail the same immersion and respect for the sport. Well, for my money, they didn't. At least so far, since there is another season to come out soon, but I highly doubt they'll change much leading up. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the fact that the people over at Box to Box were willing to divulge millions of dollars into a series like Track and Field, but there is a lot of components about this series that just made me feel like a few hours went by, and I spent maybe a few minutes at a time genuinely engaged with whatever story they were trying to tell here. Despite the very high production value and top-of-the-line cast they had at their disposal, it's kind of messily told at times. There's not a lot of actual track at hand here, and there are just so many drawn-out segments throughout the first season that I was just tempted to skip until I got to something genuinely interesting. Let's start off with what I liked about Sprint though, because there are a couple golden nuggets that stood out to me.
Right on, baby. Appreciate you, man. Good job. Right on. Right on.
Track and field is an inherently messy sport to follow, even if we centralize it around the 100 and 200 alone. Thankfully, the choices of athletes picked to explain these concepts were actually pretty great. Allison Felix is the perfect veteran of choice to explain the intensity of every type of competition possible, given her versatility and longevity in the sport. And Michael Johnson and Otto Bolin are also great additions that relay their experiences nicely into the mix, to where you have a pretty solid understanding of why, when, and how track and field athletes race in this sport overall. Hell, they even brought in Usain Bolt for a couple words, which was pretty sick too. Some of the coaches here are also very endearing to watch, and the banter and/or rivalry between some of them was incredibly fun to see. There were two in particular that stood out to me though. USA's Dennis Mitchell from Star Athletics seems like a great guy who really knows how to interact with his athletes in a way they seem to love back, and Paul Francis of MVP in Jamaica is pretty entertaining at times too. The banter rival hybrid between the two coaches share back and forth at times is actually really nice to see in a sport where the two countries are fiercely pinned against each other from spectators 24/7. Mitchell's bond with Sha'carri in particular is honestly one of my favorites and is really heartwarming to see, because you can really tell he knows exactly how to interact with her, down to even the little handshakes they have. And the more intense moments between them were probably the only times that got legitimately emotional in Season 1. Really glad they captured her World Championship celebration and build-up, and Sha'carri honestly is just a fascinating athlete to follow in general, given her unapologetic, no bullshit attitude throughout. The men's sprinting rivalries weren't super interesting on paper, given Jacobs and Curley weren't on their game that year, but I do think they did a great job at nailing Fred Curley's persona in particular. And it was pretty sick to see some behind-the-scenes footage of him completely denying to talk to the press, just trying not to go through the mix zone at all. Then it cuts to him being in a room with Wallace Spearman Jr., where he really confronts Curley face-to-face about changing his mindset towards winning. And there's also a couple other key moments that really made me feel in the moment.
Go to my office. I got plenty of cool stuff you can look at.
For a documentary that's very heavy on dialogue and storytelling throughout, the team honestly flopped on some of the most dramatic and interesting aspects of some of these athletes and resorted to pretty run-of-the-mill stories. They either just didn't do their research and didn't ask the right questions, or they just pulled back and as a result, played it way too safe to prevent making any of the athletes uncomfortable, or just didn't mention some athletes at all for whatever reason. Sha'carri Richardson took up a good chunk of the documentary, but they did not tell her backstory properly at all, and with the way it's abruptly edited, you can tell they just wanted to breeze past it too. This woman rode the biggest roller coaster of emotions I have ever seen in the sport. There is a lot more to Sha'carri's downfall and revitalization that would probably make me bawl my eyes out if she herself were to talk about it, but we got none of that. I'm just going to assume Sha'carri just didn't want to talk about it when she was interviewed, and that the production team at least tried to ask her more pressing questions, because she does tend to respond poorly to people mentioning even her more innocuous struggles nowadays.
Well, obviously I didn't make the team last year. I don't think you had to say that. The difference between now and then is just staying dedicated and focused, blocking out the noise, blocking out media like yourself.
Didn't have such a great time in the...
Well, thank you for mentioning that I didn't have a great time. I think that was already obvious.
However, it was definitely still possible to tell her story more efficiently because a lot of stuff is archived on YouTube or is just out there in general, because sha'carri's story is genuinely one of the most compelling and fascinating ones I've seen out of the sport in years. Kenya's Ferdinand Omanyala was another major miss too. Like, how did they not take a few uninterrupted minutes to properly introduce him? This guy was constantly ostracized and shamed for trying to become a sprinter in a country almost exclusively known for distance running, and his story and ability to becoming one of the fastest in the world is nothing shy of phenomenal. I'd suggest watching his appearance on the Ready Set Go podcast for more info because it's honestly a great story. On top of that, he was also a very legitimate gold medal contender the entire time leading up to the 2023 World Championships, with times like this, even if he dropped the ball in the finals. Also, the way he talks just sounds so inherently philosophical and relaxing to listen to that he could talk about anything and I probably would have just watched it anyways.
You can't think about Olympics and you've not even started the mid-season tour. So
everything he says sounds wise. If you said, I want to drink water because it's made of ice, it sounds so much better to be like, I want to drink some water because I'm ice in it. You know what? I said the same.
Also, where the hell is Area Knighton? Didn't he run 1949 in April that year? And was like the only legitimate threat to Noah Lyles going into the Olympics? Speaking of which, this is the obvious one people have been mentioning, but there really is way too much damn Noah Lyles in this thing. Like, didn't this guy already get his own series on Netflix? Now, unlike some people critiquing this choice, I actually don't mind Noah Lyles overall. Sure, I think his antics are a little too manufactured and forced at times, but the guy is obviously trying to have fun and is a phenomenal athlete on top of that. However, they put way too much time into this guy, because while he does have a few interesting things to his story, he's not that interesting, and his coach could not be less interesting of a person to follow as well. Honestly, I would have taken an entire episode of just sha'carri or the Star Athletics team as a whole, because their whole vibe and atmosphere just seems insanely fun to watch. Even if it meant cutting 20 or 30 minutes of Lyles' personal life or monologuing out that I honestly didn't need to see. I don't know, there's a couple other examples, but for a series heavily focused on storytelling, they definitely made some confusing choices for sure. But I'm not going to put the fault entirely on box-to-box films because I do think the athletes just didn't feel like answering some questions in full. Speaking of which, there really is way too much monologuing or personal life segments throughout this thing. I'm not going to spend any time picking at this, but given you're only allotted about 40 minutes per episode, I just felt like they could have divulged their time towards more productive segments and ideas, which leads me to one of my bigger gripes and questions about this season. Where is the training footage? Why didn't they just show us what type of workouts they do or how intense the atmosphere is for these training groups? They'll just show a few starts, some talking, and that's really it. And some pointless weight room footage that no one cares about. Replace like half the episodes talking and personal lives with actual training footage and some surface level knowledge about sprinting with some nice editing. Maybe throw in a biomechanical animation to give the casual viewers something cool to be like, ooh, ah, to look at. And these episodes become infinitely more watchable and accessible. Pull up a Track All Access video or a Workout Wednesday video from the Flow Track Vault, and you will see that there is very entertaining footage you can squeeze out of just one single training session, let alone access to probably months of it from the best in the world. I'm just gonna say it again, I would have killed to see an entire episode dedicated to Star Athletics. On YouTube, sha'carri uploaded a 30-minute vlog of her time at the Texas Relays. You know what the most viewed part of the video was? That's right, the part of her where she's actually training. Overall, there's way too much time spent off the track and nowhere near as much time spent actually on the track. Also, where's the relay footage? I've heard so much about the politics and drama these camps can bring to the table, but this whole season avoided the 4x1 like the plague. On the editing side, they did not show a single finals result at all. Like, just pull them up like this. Give the casual viewer something to look at and familiarize with to some degree. Even when they introduce every athlete, there's no times listed among their accolades. So I'm almost convinced they were just allergic to numbers and wanted to exclusively stick to medals, wins, and nothing more. You can hear some of the times being said, or they're briefly shown on the race timer, but that's kind of it. I get that it makes things easier to follow on paper, but at the same time, part of following track as well, knowing how fast someone actually ran, and new people need to at least have some sort of benchmark for how fast someone is, outside of when someone breaks a world or national record. One of the stranger problems that's not exactly at fault of the producers was, 2023 was honestly not that interesting for sprinting besides the women's 100, and even then things felt slightly barren too with Elaine Thompson-Herah not being in shape at all before the World Championships. In the men's 100, Marcel Jacobs was constantly injured, and it was honestly quite depressing seeing him train and try to race the entire time. Fred Curley was running like shit the whole year compared to his 2021 and 2022 form. Coleman hadn't broken 9.8 since 2019. The men's 100 was really just centered around the fact that Lyles was getting into solid shape for the 100, and they had to rely on the next best option, Zarnell Hughes, to fill in that rivalry gap since all the previous world champions and sub 9.8 guys were just not in good form at all. And for the men's 200, there was a rivalry worth noting between Lyles and Arian Knighton, but they didn't mention him like at all. Like the guy ran 1949 as a teenager. How did he get so little screen time and Hughes got like half an episode dedicated to him? Also, no relay mentions again, even at Worlds, which was by far the weirdest decision I've seen made here. Sha'carri ran the fastest anchor leg in history, so that's just a criminal offense they glossed over entirely, especially when this gem was captured on film. And for Lyles, they just had him stick to saying he doubled when in reality he tripled. I'm almost certain the production team distinctly made this choice because I can assure you if I won 3 gold medals, I'd be flaunting all 3 of them.
To feel like to double.
Makes you feel like the man.
I mean, you had Allison Felix at your disposal and you didn't talk to her about relay legs either. I'm praying they just saved all the relay stuff for the second season because otherwise it is such a chronically bad miss on the series' part. There's probably a few things I'm missing, but overall, I didn't really like the first season of Sprint. There's nothing offensively bad about it, but it felt incredibly padded out and sometimes confusing to follow, even for someone that knew just about everything within the 2023 season. Now, as I'm editing this, I actually realized this thing is taking off way more than I thought. I couldn't find much on social media at first, so I didn't think it was doing crazy numbers, but Netflix seems to be shilling the hell out of this on their algorithm or something. So if this thing is getting new people into the sport, especially in great numbers, I mean, that's genuinely fantastic. I know this is going to sound cynical or pedantic or whatever you want to call it, but I do think the fancy production and the sense of being exposed to a new sport, combined with, again, the strong cast, makes it seem more interesting to complete newbies who stumbled upon the series, combined with Netflix's algorithm helping out. But again, win is a win, and I can't be anything but happy that it's doing as well as it is. Sure, it didn't help that a few prior world champions just completely flopped in 2023, either due to injuries or just were not performing well for whatever reason, but the studio didn't really try to make that ground up, and when they did have their best resources at hand, they didn't utilize them well enough. With that said, I kinda understand why box-to-box films focused so heavily on dialogue and backstories, because the thing about sprinting is that these races are literally 10 to 20-ish seconds long. In a sport like cycling, there's a lot of buildup, a lot of strategy, and a lot that can go wrong or well throughout a long period of time. Same with golf. In one game of 18 holes, you can have a myriad of ups and downs. The weather could drastically change from one hole to another. F1 Grand Prix are hours long as well. But with a sprinting documentary, you kind of have to find a way to get 40 minutes out of a couple 10 to 20 second races throughout multiple episodes nonetheless. And this is a barrier I'd imagine is very, very hard to tackle for a production company that's worked on much more patient and lengthier sports. On the other hand, I think this could have easily been remedied a good bit with more training footage alone, especially with the addition of relay-related stuff too. A bit tangential, but this is why I think distance running would make for a fantastic docuseries. Not only is running one of the more popular athletic hobbies out there, if not maybe the most popular, but there are so many semi-mainstream contenders that would serve as fantastic characters and rivals. The training is much easier to document and portray on the screen compared to sprinters doing starts that are ambiguously defined as just fast and nothing more. The races are longer too and easier to break down, but we're getting off topic here. If you want to watch Sprint yourself, you can bang it out in a day, and I would try giving it a shot, but just be prepared for a whole lot of talking and not a whole lot of track. Overall though, I hope the season takes a much different direction if they actually want to show it off as a track-centered docuseries, because this sport does have a lot to offer and show off. Anyways, that's my shtick on it. What do you guys think? Was it good? Was it okay? Did you not like it at all? It seems like opinions are pretty all over the place. Thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel, and if you want to support the channel for more track and field content like this, come on over and become a patron. Drop a sub and check out my other links below. I'll see you on whatever video I upload next, and take care.